Wow, this is awesome. I have a lot of experience in public speaking. I think the last time I addressed an audience was 70 some odd years ago when I was running for class president at Brooklyn Technical High School. I lost the election, by the way. I want to thank the rabbi again for inviting me to honor the veterans. And I see we have quite a few here. By the way, this is a wonderful idea. Maybe we'll use it as a tradition and we'll have an opportunity to listen to other stories that veterans have. The rabbi went over very quickly that she was also a veteran. Maybe someday she'll honor us and tell us some of the stories. Imagine a Jewish chaplain, a woman in the U.S. Navy. I don't know how many Jews there were there at the time, but I imagine she has some interesting stories to tell us. She's an incredible, incredible person, by the way. The luncheon we had was quite an experience if anybody has the opportunity to sit down with our spiritual leader on a one-on-one basis. It's quite an experience. Let's see where to begin. I would like to come up the front here and speak as Rabbi Schranz used to do. And by the way, Rabbi, it's awfully nice to see you here. I'm happy to see that you're well enough to come to services. He used to come up in the front, and I thought that was beautiful. He sort of encompassed everybody. But they tell me I can't leave the bima because they're recording it, and if I leave it, they'll miss some of it, so you'll forgive me. The theme of what I'm going to talk about today is there's only one God. And it wasn't my idea. It's coincidentally about, I'm not going to run too long. Coincidentally, about a week ago, I got a call from a priest in Oklahoma City who was the head of a very, very large congregation. They happened to rent some space from us in Oklahoma. And over the years, I got fairly friendly with him. And I happened to tell him the same story that I told the rabbi. And he called me last week and said that he was so taken with it, he decided to make that part of his sermon. And the reception that he got was one of the finest sermons that he ever had. I'm sure I'll get a lot less. In any event, there's only one God. I want you to keep that in mind because some of the things I'm going to talk about, normally I don't speak too much about, and the only reason I think this is a good venue to perhaps go into a little detail is because I want to emphasize the point of that there being one God. Where to start? I guess I should start at the beginning. About when I was 17 and a half years old, 1943, early 44, maybe 43, there was a program in the United States Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Corps, which allowed gifted students to go to college and be paid for. There was no GI Bill at that time, but the government wanted bright men from America and women, I suppose, to go to college. We were very, very poor. And so the ability to have the government pay for my college was an incredible thing for us. I wanted to be a nuclear physicist. And perhaps if it wasn't for Hitler, I might have been one, I don't know. In any event, I passed this ASTP test. They had it for the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines. And you had to go 3 months to basic training before you could be accepted to college. And of course, you had to be accepted to a college. I was accepted to MIT. And I was not quite 18. My mother and father had to give permission for me to join the Army. I had to be 18 at that time. But I wasn't going to the Army. I wasn't going to war. I was going to college. So they gave me permission. I sent down to Camp Landing, Florida. and started my basic training. 3 weeks before I concluded my basic training, President Roosevelt, Stalin, and Winston Churchill had a meeting in Yalta. I think it was in a battleship in the Mediterranean. At that time, Germany had double-crossed Russia. They had made a peace treaty prior to this, and Hitler double-crossed Russia, attacked Russia, and at this point in time, they were almost at the gates of Stalingrad. The purpose of the Yalta meeting was for Stalin to convince America and England to start and open up a second front. Evidently, they convinced Roosevelt and Churchill, and when President Roosevelt got back home, he canceled the entire college program for all services. 2 weeks prior to the time I was ready to start college, the entire program was canceled. And of course, I don't want to say I was the cream of the crop, but the smartest, among the smartest men in America at that time were all sent in to the infantry and shipped overseas. We were landed in Southampton, England, and from there, I think we were there a week or two. We were shipped immediately, shortly after D-Day, onto the beaches of Normandy. We landed in Normandy, and we were green. We were green troops. Everybody, well, I shouldn't say everybody, the cadre, the officers were older, but mostly young men like myself. The only experience we had was a couple of months in basic training with a rifle. And so we were green, but we were thrown right into the battle. There, as we started from the beaches of Normandy, we headed east across France. And the first battles were called the hedgerows. We crossed France, having to pass the hedgerows of France. France had an unusual situation. Instead of the various farms were cordoned off by very, very strong hedges. They were maybe 3 or 4 feet wide, 6 feet high. There was no way you can get through them. The only way the army was able to proceed across the farmlands was to have the tanks level the hedges, and then, of course, we were able to get through. But I remember we're close to Thanksgiving now. Looking forward to my daughter's Thanksgiving, by the way. I hope my wife will be able to be there. She's just, as you heard, she just had her hip broken. But in any event, I remember a Thanksgiving in France. On Thanksgiving Day, the Army managed to have a large tent set up with a hot meal, an actual turkey meal. Remember this, as we were going across in combat, we never really had anything warm to eat. We had K-rations. For those of you who don't know what a K-ration is, it looked like a little Cracker Jack box. And in that Cracker Jack box, believe it or not, they had little packs of Camels and Chesterfield cigarettes. We had 3 of them. They had a bar of chocolate. They had a bar of cheese, American cheese. They had a little can that had a wick and some wax in it that we were able to light and heat up some food, a little sort of a candle Bunsen burner. And they had a can of Spam. We used to call it SOS, which was something on a shingle. I don't want to mention it. But it was awful. It was awful. We had that for breakfast, for lunch, and for dinner. So you can imagine having a wonderful, warm, hot Thanksgiving dinner. It was incredible. We looked forward to it. Unfortunately, that day, it rained cats and dogs. It was murder. We had arrived in this open field, and of course, once we arrived in the field, at that time it wasn't quite so cold, and it was not that difficult to build our foxholes. But every time we stopped, we dug our foxholes, because the Germans had a propensity for lobbing in shells, 88 shells, wherever we managed to be. I guess they did it all over the front, but it seemed like it followed us. In any event, we dug our foxholes, and about 2, 3 o'clock, each group in each foxhole was called. We took our little can, looked like a dish pan with a handle on it. It was a tin pan. Ran up through this pouring rain which was about a block away from my foxhole, to the main tent where they were serving turkey, cranberry sauce. We had a yam mixture of some sort, baked potato, not baked potato, mashed potatoes, I think some corn or some green beans. But it smelled good, it was delicious. They whacked it in our can. You've seen that in the movies, I'm sure. And by the time I got mine, I had a full plate of food. I couldn't wait to get back to my foxhole where I had a little pup tent covering it to protect us against the rain. But by the time I got back to the hole, it was soaked. The can was half filled with water. It wasn't hot anymore, but believe it or not, we enjoyed it. It was good, even though it was soaking wet. In any event, from France, we started to head north. We liberated Paris, and we headed north to go into Belgium. I just want to stop for a moment and give you a little perspective. A division, a United States division, has about 25,000 men. And it's broken up into regiments, battalions, companies, platoons. I was in the infantry division, and I was in the radio squad, the radio platoon, which was way down in the bottom, buck private. And my job was to carry a SCR radio, which I'll tell you another story later about the radio. It's about 2.5 feet wide, 3 feet high, about 6 inches thick. And the reason we used those radios, we had it strapped on our back, and I had a hand phone. And the whole purpose was to be close to the captain or the lieutenant or even a major sometimes, and have the phone available for him so that he can communicate with the rest of the outfits. We had other little phones. They were quite awkward, not like we have cell phones today, but they were only good for 2 or 3 blocks. The SCR 300 that I carried was good for maybe 2 or 3 miles. But anyway, the troops started out with 25,000 men. And in my platoon, or my little radio company, there were 5 of us. Keep in mind, and I'm going back to the theme, the 5 of us was a Roman Catholic, Joe Grimaldi, a Baptist, Harry Hurley, a non-believer, Floyd, I think his name was. He was an atheist. We had a Protestant, Russian Orthodox religion, and that was Steve Samboy. He was our sergeant, and a Jew. 5 of us were in. Each one of us would carry a radio and be assigned to different captains or lieutenants. After we liberated Paris, we went up north and we liberated a little town in Belgium called Tongeren. This is where the story really begins. On entering the town of Tongeren, the weather had already turned pretty cold. We naturally started to dig our foxholes. It was very, very cold. The ground was hard. It was almost like concrete. But we had to protect ourselves. Whenever we stopped, we started to dig our foxholes. And our captain called us around and announced that we don't have to dig foxholes anymore for tonight, for that night. The Burgermeister, who is the mayor of the town, had come to him and said, your outfit had liberated our town. Our people are so thankful. They're not going to let you sleep in the ground tonight. You're going to sleep in a home. You're going to sleep in beds tonight, so you don't have to dig foxholes. Again, I can't tell you the kind of feeling to this day, 70 years later. I could remember the experience of feeling that we don't have to sleep in a cold foxhole in a sleeping bag. When you got up in the morning, it was snowing. The water seeped into the hole. Sometimes it was so cold we had to break the ice. Our nose was the only thing sticking out of our sleeping bags. We had to break the ice in order to get up and get out of the foxhole. And this night we were going into a house to sleep, imagine. In any event, before we were assigned to each house, he told us he's got one little problem, and he wants to be sure we're aware of. We're to keep our rifles with us at every single place when we go to the bathroom, when we go to sleep, because we had just heard from regimental headquarters that the Germans had trained special squads that spoke American, spoke English, even with a Brooklynese accent. They were dressed like us. They had the same outfits, the same uniforms. They had our rifles, and they were being parachuted behind our lines in this town of Tongeren and in the area, so that we had to be very, very careful. They would try to disrupt our communications, attack our vehicles, our jeeps, kill whatever soldiers they got close to, and that we had to be very careful with the password, exceptionally careful. As a matter of fact, password would change every half hour. And he said, if, for example, you were on guard duty and you said Brooklyn, and the answer came back Dodgers, you were to shoot them on sight, because the answer would be completely unrelated, would be something like Brooklyn Elephant. And so we were very, very uptight, very nervous. Everybody you looked at, you didn't know whether they were the enemy or whether they were part of us. But in any event, we were assigned to a house. It was a small little house, had a peaked roof with a little dormer, a hayloft, with the door was open at the time. We didn't think at the time, where were the people that lived in this house? What we knew is we were going into sleep. Any event, we got upstairs. I was assigned to the top floor with my buddy Joe Grimaldi, who, by the way, is the only one still left of our outfit. And we had on long johns. They were khaki-colored long johns. And we had white sheets and covers and pillows. It was incredible, incredible. About 2, 3 in the morning, I heard noises. I had to get up to go to the bathroom. By the way, can everybody hear me fine? Am I loud enough? Yeah? I heard noises downstairs, and I nudged my buddy. I said, Joe, please back me up. Somebody's trying to break into the house. I hear noises downstairs. We both jumped out of bed, and I tiptoed down the first floor, and as I was going down lower and lower, I heard the noises get a little louder. He backed me up with his rifle. I had my rifle. And the noise, when we got to the first floor, the noise was coming in the basement. I said, Joe, it's in the basement. We got to go down. Just back me up again. Be very careful. If anything happens, watch out. I got a feeling they're trying to come into the basement window. So I walked down the steps. I had to duck down because there was a very low ceiling. And as I ducked to get under, I saw The noises were getting a little bit louder. I saw a dirt floor and a group of people sitting in a circle with a candle and a black statue. And they were mumbling and talking. I found out that this was the family who lived in this house. They had given up their bed, they had stayed up all night, and they were praying for our good health and our safety. And they were praying to their patron saint. Their patron saint was a black Madonna, which was a statue maybe 18 inches high, completely black, was in the center of the circle. And in the circle was a man, maybe 30, 40 years old, a woman his age, cradling an infant, another older woman, again a man, and two other children. They were up all night praying for us. After about, of course, we were very appreciative, and we got very friendly with them after. We were there about 3 days in that house before we went into the Hurtgen Forest, which was the beginning of the attack on Germany. But I remember we left their house about 3 a.m. in the morning. The Germans, when they left Tongeren, they had taken everything. They stripped all the food from them. They'd taken their cattle, their cheeses, their hams, all their food. They had nothing. But when we left at 3 a.m., Marie was outside the front. She used to call me David, by the way, David rather. I was the interpreter because I spoke a little Yiddish, and which was somewhat like German, and they spoke German. Of course, they spoke Belgique, but they were on the German border. They understood German. And so I was able to communicate not only for my outfit, but with her. 3 o'clock in the morning, she was standing outside. It was freezing cold. We were all getting ready to leave the house and load up on our Jeeps and trucks for our trip into Germany, or our attack into Germany. And she had a little brown bag, and she had given each one of us, the 5 of us, a sandwich. They had managed to hide some cheese and some meats, and she wanted to be sure that we had something other than our K-rations on our way into Germany. And just before she left, I'll never forget it, she took me around and whispered in my ear. She says, "David, remember, we prayed to our patron saint. Don't be afraid. Hab nicht keine Angst. Don't be afraid. You will be safe. Anybody that slept under my roof will be safe." Of course, I was 18 years old at the time. Didn't affect me. I'll be safe. I'm going to be safe anyway. Who thinks of getting killed? You don't think of dying or being wounded. That happens to somebody else. Doesn't happen to me. But in any event, it's only afterward that I began to feel the importance of what she said, and it sort of sunk in later on. When we left Tongeren, that's when the picnic really started. To give you a little semblance, I don't know if I should go into too much detail. I don't want to keep a little semblance of what we were up against. The Germans had built a Siegfried line along the entire stretch of Germany, bordering on France. By the way, France had built the Maginot Line, which was equivalent of the Siegfried Line, but the Germans, when they conquered France, they were much smarter than the French. Instead of going through the Maginot Line, they went around through Belgium, skipped the Maginot Line, went south, and that's how they conquered France. We didn't have that luxury. We had to go through the Siegfried Line. The Siegfried Line consisted of a series of pillboxes, hundreds of miles long. A pillbox was, just as it described, looked like a dome. It's about 8 feet high, with a little slit, a little window on the bottom where they had machine guns. They were about every 10 or 15 feet. And they were 8 feet thick. Our artillery shells literally bounced off the shells. I'm getting a little ahead of my story. I want to go back a little bit. After leaving Tongeren, we went into the Hurtgen Forest. And that was a very, very difficult period. The Germans were literally shelling us 24/7, every minute. It wasn't so much the shells that we were worried about, but the forest was so thick that if the shells hit the trees, the branches and the trunks would splatter, and the shreds from the trees would be even more dangerous than the shrapnel itself. One morning, and again, I'm doing this to emphasize, not to tell you what a tough time I had. I got up one morning. My buddy was praying all night because the shells were coming. And by the way, we had, during those periods that we slept in the ground, we had what was known as bed check Charlie. Does anybody know what that is? You older guys that were in World War II? Bed check Charlie was a plane that used to come over our area with a beautiful voice, a young woman. They used to play Frank Sinatra and Glenn Miller and Lily Marlene and Don't Sleep Under the Apple, or don't, whatever. Songs that we remembered from home. And after they played the song, this beautiful voice would come on and say, "You guys are freezing, you're sitting in a foxhole, you're dying. Surrender, give up. We'll have a warm meal waiting for you." Anyway, we used to laugh. But every night we had bed check Charlie. In any event, one day getting up, breaking the ice from my foxhole, maybe 10 feet, maybe where this other beamer is, another buddy of mine was with his buddy. And the morning, instead of the foxhole, there was a shell hole. A shell had hit directly into the foxhole. The body parts were all over the trees. 10 feet away, I wasn't touched. After Hurtgen Forest is when we started to advance towards the German lines and the Siegfried Line. And here is where the Battle of the Bulge started. For those of you who don't know what the Battle of the Bulge were, the younger people, the Germans had taken one last gasp. They had assembled thousands of tanks, Tiger. They had probably the best tanks at that time, by the way. Tiger tanks, the best of their infantry. And they had attacked in order to get to Antwerp. Their objective was to get the port of Antwerp to choke off our supplies. It was our main supply. If they did that, they would probably trap half the army, half the American and British army. And they were fairly successful. Another amazing part of that story is we were at the northern part, perhaps a block or two north of the Battle of the Bulge. South of the Bulge was the town of Bastogne, which I'm sure everybody's heard about. Battle of Bastogne, where the Americans said to the German commander when he asked him to give up, nuts. It was in the movies and so on. In any event, my outfit was perhaps 2 blocks, 78th Infantry Division, from the actual piercing of our lines. We heard later the reason that it was that he didn't attack the 78th Infantry Division. For some reason or other, we don't know why, but the Germans had thought that our division, which was green, and they knew it was green, was a trick, and that it was consisted mostly of black soldiers. And they were fearful of the black soldiers. And as a result of that, they didn't attack our army. They attacked just slightly south, the 101st Infantry Division. In any event, if they had gone 2 blocks further north, I wouldn't be here today. I don't think the people in the 4th row over there would be here today, because my children and grandchildren, I don't think, would be here. Because almost everybody, the American troops, we were wiped out. The interesting part about that story was, after the Bulge, and they were almost at the doors of Antwerp, General Patton came in with his tank. I'll never forget, he was standing on top of the tank with a bullhorn. He had 2 revolvers at his side with pearl handles. And he announced to us, he says, "Gentlemen, the Germans have put their," I won't use the word he used, "private parts in a meat grinder, and the only thing we have to do is turn the handle." Meaning that the Bulge was like a finger, and he wanted us, the people, the 101st from south of us in Bastogne, to drive north, and our outfit was to drive south, the idea being to cut off the entire German army, which we did, by the way, and which was very successful. And we captured hundreds of thousands of Germans. I think that was the beginning of the end of Hitler. He didn't know it at the time, but it was the beginning of the end. From there, we went through to the Siegfried Line. I don't know how much detail I should give you. As we're going through, in order to get through the Siegfried Line, as I described, we couldn't get through these pillboxes. Every time you approached, they had crossfire from both pillboxes. There was no way to attack them, no way to get through. Whoever we sent up was immediately killed or wounded. The only way we were able to penetrate it is we got a tank, one of American tanks, with a big snow shovel, and we literally buried the pillbox under earth. That was the only way we get through. In any event, we got through Göttingen, and we got through the Siegfried Line, and we entered into a little town called Schmidt. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on Schmidt, and then I won't go into any more detail. Schmidt was a town that was in a valley between 2 mountains. And between the 2 mountains, there was a major dam called the Schwammanuel Dam. We didn't realize at the time the dangers that we were in. But almost the entire 78th Infantry Division was headquartered, or we were deployed in this valley, in this town of Schmidt. In order to get to Schmidt, it was an extremely difficult battle. They fought like hell not to give that town up. I don't know the reason, but it was a very difficult battle. We were bivouacked, my little outfit, in a little building, and we went into the basement because the 88s were coming in every minute, constantly. And my captain said, Mr. Sachs, he called me, Sachs, get upstairs in the window. I have to contact one of the patrols I sent out to capture the Schwammanuel Dam. I didn't know at the time what he was talking about, but I knew I had to go up. Couldn't be in the basement. I had to go up in the attic. I took the SCR radio and I put it in front of me in the window, with the antenna sticking out so I can get the best reception. Found out later, not at that time, that the communications that I was doing with the patrol that went to capture the Schwammanuel Dam, the Army regimental and division headquarters were worried that if the Germans dynamited that dam, the entire valley would have been inundated, probably wiped us all out, including yours truly. I understand that we got there within 5 minutes. The charges were set, the dynamite was throughout the dam. All they had to do was push the plunger. For some reason or other, they captured them before, and the plunger was never pushed, and the dam was never dynamited. One other story to emphasize, there is only one God. in standing at the window with my radio. Shells were coming in outside constantly. And all of a sudden, I heard a tremendously loud noise. I think that's one of the reasons one of my ears are not too good today. And a piece of shrapnel fell right between me and the radio. Remember, the radio is this thick, this wide. A piece of shrapnel the size of maybe a lemon or a peach went through the radio, steel radio, through the guts of it, and dropped inches before me, between me and the radio. The radio wasn't there. Again, I don't think I'd be here today. From that point on, we went through Germany, the Ruhr Valley, which is the industrial heartland of Germany, the Cologne Plains, which, by the way, the city was devastated, unbelievable. Cologne, every single building, there were buildings, concrete buildings that Germans had built, beautiful, beautiful town, completely destroyed. The amazing part about that was there was one church, beautiful church with a very big steeple. For miles around, utter complete devastation. And this church was not touched. Not touched. Remained standing as we drove up. I'll never forget it. You see an entire city flattened with rubbish and incredible. And then off in the distance, you see this church that was not church. I don't know how that happened, but it happened. In any event, we went through Germany. There were many stories like I just told you, which I'm not going to go into detail with, perhaps another time. But we had many very close calls before we ended up, just before Berlin. We went through Cologne, the Ruhr Valley. By the way, our outfit was the first outfit across the Remagen Bridge. That was one of the biggest last obstacles we were very worried about. And we got terribly lucky as we approached the Rhine River. We saw that the bridge was not blown. The Germans' plan was to blow the bridge so that we couldn't get over it. But our outfit was one of the first across. And I think that spelled the end of Germany, because once we crossed the Rhine River, there were really no natural barriers. In any event, we managed to get through. And now I want to just jump 50 years later. We have a paper called The Flash, which is a paper of the 78th Infantry Division. By the way, this month, just coincidentally, is the last publication because there's so few of us left. And in The Flash, it was announced that they're going to return to victory 50 years after the VE Day. We were going to go back to Europe and retrace our steps that we did during the war. And so my 5 buddies, all of which survived, by the way, I had 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star. All my other buddies also had Purple Hearts. But none of the wounds were very serious, mostly minor. But the 5 of us, with our wives, were able to join maybe 200, 250 people who were left to go back and retrace our steps in Germany. By the way, at the end of the war, there might have been 2,000 original troops from the 25,000. In any event, where do you think we're going to go? We're going to look forward to going back to Tongeren. Of course, we went from England through France and to Belgium. Look forward to go back and see Marie again. We come into the town of Tongeren. We didn't recognize the town. It looked like Levittown. When we were there was a building here, and 2 blocks away, another little cottage. The whole town was built up. My wife was very smart. She had brought a picture that we had taken 50 years earlier. The picture consisted of me, my brother, my buddy Joe Grimaldi, the infant that was being cradled that night in Tongeren, and another one of the daughters, maybe 3-year-old. The daughter had my helmet on, and the boy had his rifle, which was taller than him. And we snapped that picture, and in the background was the house and a picket fence, a dormer with the dormer open and a little hay sticking out. And Seal says to me, we were looking around, we couldn't remember which house. Seal says, Dave, I think that's the house. Look, it's almost the same as this picture. I said, all right, we'll try. I'll go up. Went up to the door, I knocked on the door. A woman in her mid-50s comes to the door. She was sort of frightened because we're there with strangers, with five guys with their wives. And I said to her, oh, is Marie? Where is Marie? And I showed her the picture. She says, oh my God, I'm 1 minute. She runs upstairs, comes down within a minute, and here she has the same picture that I had in my hand. We had given her a duplicate. They had it on the mantle for 50 years on the dresser. And the woman who brought the picture down told me that the girl in the picture is her. She's now 55 years old. She grabs a hold of me, du bist David, you are David. Couldn't believe it. We talk about you all the time. I said, where's Marie? I thought maybe she died. So, oh my God, Marie is left to Liège on a little shopping trip. She won't be back till late tonight. You'll come back. She wants to see you. I said, we can't come back. We have an itinerary. Again, the burgomaster of the town of Tongeren was giving a reception for us. They had commemorated a plaque because we had liberated the town, and they were giving a party. And the next morning, 8 o'clock, we had to be off on our bus tour going forward. We told her we couldn't be back. She cried. She said, Marie will be so disappointed. Anyway, there was nothing we could do. That night, we're sitting at the reception, and the captain goes to the microphone and he says, hey, Sachs, come on up here. I want to talk to you. Got scared for a moment. I don't know what he was talking about. All of a sudden, he calls me. We had our whole outfit there. I go up. He says, you know Marie? You know Marie? I says, yeah. He says, she sent 2 cars down. She wants you and your buddies in the radio section to go back to the house. She must see you. She had exchange students, American students, living in her house, and she hired a couple of cars and had the students come. Of course, we couldn't turn it down. We left the party, we left the reception, our wives and the 5 of us, and we went back to the house. I don't know how to describe this, but when we got back to the house, Marie opened the door. She almost screamed. She said, David, she grabbed the hold. She says, my boys are back. She called us her boys are back. It was a wonderful, wonderful, tearful reunion. Her husband that we had known, the man that was sitting in the circle, had died, and she married another man during the period. He was a freedom fighter. When we got into the living room, I saw on the mantle the patron saint, their patron saint, the Black Madonna. And towards the middle of the evening, she pulled me aside. She said, you see, David, I told you, anybody that was sleeping under my roof is going to be back and is going to be well. Took 50 years, but here you are, thanks to our patron saint. It was really quite an experience, quite a thought. The truth of the matter is that the 5 of us were back, unhurt, with our wives, and we went through a war. I suppose the skeptics would say, hey, there is only one God. What about the people that died and were wounded and lost arms and legs? I don't know. I'll leave that to the philosophers and people that are a lot smarter than I am. One thing I do know, and I choose to believe, there's only one God. Thank you, everybody. Good Shabbos. Really, thanks.